Why try to crack a password when you can, literally just ask for it?
Right. It sounds ridiculous, but
Yeah, I mean, I want you to really picture that for a second. Imagine this highly sophisticated threat actor,
yeah.
right? And they're just staring down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art enterprise firewall.
The kind of firewall companies spend half their IT budget on.
Exactly. And sure, they could spend months reverse engineering binaries, trying to uncover some zero-day vulnerability in the perimeter defense. Or, and this is the crazy part, they could just pick up the phone.
Yeah.
They adopt a slightly stressed but polite tone, pretend to be a senior executive who's locked out of their account, and simply ask a junior help desk technician to hand over the keys to the kingdom.
And it works. It works all the time.
Or maybe they bypass the digital perimeter entirely just by, glancing over his shoulder at the local coffee shop. The reality of network compromise is often just chillingly simple.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it forces a complete recalibration of how we actually approach security architecture.
Yeah.
Because, well, we spend the vast majority of our budgets obsessing over packet filtering and, endpoint detection, cryptographic protocols.
That's heavy technical stuff.
Exactly. And in doing so, we kind of blind ourselves to the human element. We ignore the massive trail of open source intelligence that organizations just broadcast to the world every single day.
Yeah.
The perimeter isn't just the edge router anymore, The perimeter is every employee's LinkedIn profile. It's every discarded memo sitting in the recycling bin out back.
Totally. And we are getting into the really deep mechanics of those vulnerabilities today. But hey, before we unpack the toolkits and the psychology of reconnaissance, do us a quick favor right now. Like, subscribe, and share this deep dive.
Please do.
Do this so you never miss the insider tips that could, honestly, one day save your career. And be sure to check out the description below for access to additional valuable resources we've curated just for you.
Yeah, there's some great stuff down there. And, operating as independent industry analysts, we actually spend a considerable amount of time evaluating how these academic cybersecurity programs translate into actual operational readiness.
Right. Does the theory match the real-world application?
Exactly. So we are dedicating this analysis to the professionals tuning in from Dr. Schuessler's Ethical Hacking and Cybersecurity Operations course.
Welcome, guys.
Along with all the early career MIS, CIS, and IT practitioners who are just looking to elevate their defensive strategies.
Because the overarching mission here really is bridging those theoretical models with the real-world operational demands that you face in a security operations center or as a systems admin. We want to position you for leadership in the TUG sector.
That's the goal.
And just for some context, this analysis marks the 4th of 14 deep dives based on the foundational framework presented in Hands-on Ethical Hacking and Network Defense, 4th edition, published in 2022 by Wilson, Simpson, and Antil.
Yeah, and if you recall, our previous analysis of Chapter 3, that dealt heavily with the kinetic side of cyber operations, right? Network and computer attack.
The explosive stuff.
Exactly. We look at the mechanisms of malware execution, buffer overflows, denial of service. We really examined the payload delivery phase.
But today, we are stepping back from the detonation phase. Chapter 4 is all about footprinting and social engineering.
Right.
We're exploring the shadows before the attack even happens, because in any penetration test or a real-world compromise, the attacker doesn't just randomly throw exploits at an IP address.
No, not the smart ones anyway.
Right. They spend weeks, sometimes months, gathering intelligence. They map the target. And the industry term for this is footprinting.
Yeah, footprinting is really the foundational phase of the entire attack lifecycle. I mean, think about it. A physical burglar doesn't just walk up and smash a window blindly.
You'd hope not.
Right? They sit across the street. They document the brand of the alarm system, the patrol routes of the security guards, the blind spots of the camera coverage.
They're casing the joint.
Exactly, casing the joint. And in the digital realm, footprinting achieves that exact same operational awareness. A security tester must define the target's entire digital and physical attack surface before a single packet is intentionally malformed.
And the framework makes this crucial operational distinction between passive and active footprinting. And for the IT professionals listening, understanding this distinction is basically the difference between conducting legal intelligence gathering and, triggering a massive incident response from a target organization.
Yeah, you do not want to mix those up.
Definitely not. So passive footprinting is entirely non-intrusive. The attacker relies strictly on publicly available information, open source intelligence, or OSINT. you aren't touching the target's infrastructure at all.
Right.
Like if you search an organization's public SEC filings or you scrape their employee directory from a third-party data broker, their intrusion detection systems log absolutely nothing. Your IP address never once interacts with their servers.
Yeah, it's completely silent. But active footprinting, that completely shifts the engagement model.
How so?
Well, this involves direct interaction with the target's actual infrastructure. You are sending probes that require a response from their systems.
Oh, I see.
So conducting a TCP Connect scan against their web server, or, pulling banners from their FTP service, attempting a DNS zone transfer, these actions generate actual network traffic.
Which means they leave a trace.
Exactly. They leave artifacts and system logs. And a properly configured SIEM, a Security Information and Event Management System, it will flag these anomalies. Active footprinting basically announces your presence to a vigilant defense team.
Which brings up a really fascinating dynamic in corporate environments, right? Because passive intelligence gathering introduces this concept of competitive intelligence.
Oh, yeah. This is huge in the corporate world.
Right. Because passive footprinting isn't just exclusively the domain of penetration testers or like advanced persistent threats. Fortune 500 companies execute these exact same techniques daily just to track their competitors.
They absolutely do.
They'll scrape job boards to see what specific coding languages a rival is hiring for, which entirely telegraphs their upcoming software architecture. They monitor public patent filings.
Yeah, competitive intelligence is a formalized, highly strategic business function.
So it's legal.
Well, that's the thing. The critical distinction between a business analyst gathering competitive intelligence and a threat actor conducting reconnaissance lies entirely in authorization and methodology.
But break that down for me. Like, I think of footprinting kind of like a home inspector versus a burglar.
That's a great analogy.
Right, because they both walk around the house looking for weak windows or broken locks, but with entirely different intents. One wants to tell you how to fix it, the other wants to climb in and steal your TV. So how does this curriculum teach students to distinguish between conducting legitimate competitive intelligence and crossing that line into active, suspicious footprinting?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the curriculum is very clear. Competitive intelligence relies strictly on data the target has willfully, or maybe inadvertently, made public.
Okay.
The exact moment you transition from, say, analyzing a public job posting to sending a malformed SQL query to the application portal that's actually hosting that job posting, you have crossed the legal and ethical boundary.
You're touching their stuff at that point.
Exactly.
Right.
For practitioners evaluating their own security posture, understanding that boundary is paramount, you must have a defined scope of work and explicit written authorization before initiating any active probes.
That makes total sense. So let's pull the OSINT toolkit apart a bit and look at the actual mechanisms of this passive discovery. Because the framework details just an extensive array of utilities that automate and scale this intelligence gathering.
It really is a massive toolbox.
Yeah. And we start with search and discovery. Now, obviously, every IT professional uses search engines, but advanced attackers leverage them as highly precise database querying tools using what the industry calls Google Dorks, or the Google hacking database.
Which is such a funny name, but it's incredibly dangerous.
Right. A Google Dork isn't just some basic keyword search. It's the exploitation of advanced search operators to force the search engine to return highly specific and often very sensitive indexed files.
Because, search engine crawlers are incredibly aggressive. If a network administrator misconfigures a web server's robots.txt file or accidentally exposes an internal file directory to the public internet, the crawler will index everything it finds.
It just scoops it all up.
Yep. So an attacker uses syntax like file type :mv combined with db_password.
Wow.
And they use that to search globally for exposed environment files containing unencrypted database credentials. Or they might use entitled, quote, index of, quote, followed by ismode_dersa to find directories listing private SSH keys.
That's terrifying.
It really is. And the Google Hacking Database, the GHDD, is basically a curated repository of these specific, highly effective queries. It transforms a normal consumer search engine into a lethal reconnaissance tool.
And we also see attackers scraping technical forums, right? Like Google Groups or Stack Overflow.
Oh, old stuff.
It's because you have an overworked systems admin who's just trying to troubleshoot a really complex BGP routing issue at 2 a.m. They post their router configuration file to a public forum asking for help, and they post it using their corporate email address.
Big mistake.
Huge. I mean, they might obscure the password, sure, but they leave the internal IP addressing scheme, the exact hardware model of the Cisco router, and the firmware version fully visible.
Yeah.
An attacker passively scraping that forum now has the employee's email for a future phishing campaign. They have the internal network topology, and they have the knowledge of a specific hardware vulnerability they can exploit later.
It highlights a really persistent vulnerability, which is the intersection of technical complexity and human fatigue. Administrators need solutions quickly, and in their haste, they just leak operational security.
Yeah, they're just trying to get their job done.
Exactly. Now, moving beyond simple search queries, the footprinting phase scales up dramatically using data aggregation and graphical user interface tools. And Maltego is really a prime example of this evolution.
I love Maltego because it operates on graph theory, right? It takes these disparate pieces of OSINT and actually visualizes the relationships between them. You don't just get a spreadsheet of data, you get a node-based map.
Which is so much easier to process visually.
Totally. You drop a target domain name onto the canvas and you run a module, which Maltego calls a transform. The transform queries an API, resolves the domain to an IP address, and plots that IP as a brand new node connected to the domain. Then you run another transform on the IP, and it pulls the registered owner's name and email. You run a transform on the email, and it scrapes social media platforms, plotting the target's Twitter handle, LinkedIn profile, known associates.
It snowballs.
Exactly. Within minutes, an attacker generates this massive, interconnected web of infrastructure and personnel.
And Spiderfoot serves a very similar function, but it focuses heavily on automating the breadth of those queries.
How is it different from Maltego?
Well, instead of manual transforms where you click and expand, Spiderfoot takes a single seed, like a host name or a subnet, and concurrently queries over 100 distinct public data sources.
Oh, wow. All at once.
Yep. It checks threat intelligence feeds, WHOIS databases, Shodan, and it automates the correlation of that data, highlighting immediate exposures without you having to manually map it out.
That's incredibly powerful, but I really want to dig into OCA, fingerprinting organizations with collected archives, because the mechanism behind FOCA is just brilliant. It targets the metadata hidden within standard Office documents.
Yeah, people forget about metadata.
They really do. When a marketing team publishes like a glossy PDF brochure to their public website, they only see the text and the nice graphics. But at the hexadecimal level, the PDF standard embeds an enormous amount of metadata.
Right.
FOCA crawls the target website, downloads every single document it can find, PDFs, Word files, Excel spreadsheets, and it systematically strips out that metadata.
And the intelligence yield from document metadata is just staggering. I mean, the metadata often reveals the underlying operating system used to create the file.
Like Windows versus Mac OS.
Exactly. It shows the specific version of Microsoft Office or Adobe Acrobat. It shows the internal username of the author, and frequently the internal IP address or network share path where the document was originally saved on the corporate network.
So an attacker hasn't sent a single packet to the internal network, yet FOCA basically hands them a list of valid employee usernames and a map of the internal IP subnets simply by analyzing public marketing materials.
That's exactly it. It's wild. Now, shifting over to network and infrastructure scanners, the toolset becomes a bit more focused on topology. Tools like Netcraft Site Report analyze the HTTP response headers of a target website to fingerprint the underlying technology stack.
Right.
It looks at the server header, the specific order of the HTTP headers, and even the handling of malformed requests to determine with high confidence whether the server is running Apache on Linux or IR on Windows Server.
And then you have tools like the Harvester, right? Which is a total staple in Kali Linux for command line intelligence gathering.
Oh, absolutely.
It is explicitly designed to scrape subdomains, email addresses, employee names from search engines, PGP key servers, all that stuff. And discovering subdomains is such a critical vector because the primary corporate website, www.example.com, is typically fortified behind web application firewalls and subjected to rigorous penetration testing.
It's locked down tight.
Exactly. But the Harvester might uncover something like dev-portal-backup.example.com,
which is almost always a forgotten development environment running deprecated vulnerable software that hasn't been patched in 3 years.
Right. It's the digital equivalent of a fortified castle leaving a rusted basement window wide open. And platforms like Spies and Domain Dossier further aggregate this infrastructure data. They act as search engines specifically for cybersecurity assets, linking domains directly to known CVEs, common vulnerabilities, and exposures.
And understanding command line utilities is completely non-negotiable for practitioners. The framework highlights Netcat and Roget,
Oh, the classic.
the absolute classics. Netcat allows you to arbitrarily read and write data across TCP and UDP network connections.
The Swiss Army knife of networking.
Exactly. You can use it to set up a quick listener on a port. You can pipe a shell across a network, or manually craft and send raw HTTP requests to a server to analyze its behavior without the interference of a web browser. And Wget provides rapid, scriptable retrieval of files over HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP. So if an attacker identifies an open directory, Wget can recursively download the entire contents in just a single command.
Boom, all their files gone. We also have to consider the temporal aspect of OSINT, though, because data that existed yesterday might be gone today.
Right, the internet is always changing.
Exactly. A company might accidentally deploy a staging server to the public internet, realize their configuration error 2 hours later, and yank it down. But the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, constantly takes snapshots of the web.
It never forgets.
It never forgets. An attacker uses the Wayback Machine to review historical iterations of a target's infrastructure. They might find an old API endpoint that was supposedly decommissioned but is still secretly accepting requests. Or they might pull API keys that were briefly hard-coded into a public JavaScript file before a developer hastily removed them.
Plus, you have things like white pages for reverse phone lookups or QoS lookups to find out exactly who registered a domain name and what IP blocks they own.
Yeah, you just piece it all together.
And the aggregation of all these disparate data points requires an orchestration layer. That's where Recon comes in. It's a full-featured web reconnaissance framework that mirrors the look and feel of Metasploit.
So it's modular.
Very modular. It utilizes independent modules, database interaction, and API key management to completely automate the OSINT process. A practitioner can configure Recon to execute Google Dorks, scrape LinkedIn for employee names, resolve the associated domains, and dump all the findings into a cleanly formatted relational database.
Which is why this curriculum doesn't just list these tools, you know? It forces the IT professional to internalize the attacker's operational tempo. A sophisticated threat actor spends up to 80% of their engagement time just in this reconnaissance phase. Yeah. By mastering FOCA's metadata extraction and Reconning's automation, security teams learn to model their own external threat landscape. They can identify and remediate their data leakage before an adversary actually weaponizes it.
But eventually, passive intelligence gathering yields all it can, and the engagement must interface with the target's perimeter.
Time to touch the servers.
Exactly. And in the modern enterprise, the primary external interface is the web application. So dissecting web applications requires specialized proxies. The curriculum focuses heavily on ZAP, the Z attack proxy, which is maintained by OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project.
And it's a free tool, right? Runs on Linux, macOS, Windows. You just need Java.
Yep, totally free.
So to really understand ZAP, you have to understand the mechanism of a man-in-the-middle proxy. When a standard user interacts with a web application, their browser encrypts the traffic and sends it directly to the web server.
Right.
But when a security tester uses ZAP's Launch Browser feature on the Quick Start tab, ZAP actually configures the browser to route all traffic locally through the ZAP application first.
It intercepts it.
Exactly. ZAP sits right between the browser and the internet. It dynamically generates SSL certificates on the fly, forcing the browser to trust ZAP, which allows ZAP to decrypt, inspect, and even modify the HTTPS traffic in real time before re-encrypting it and sending it to the destination server.
And this interception capability is just profound. I mean, think about it. A developer might implement client-side validation using JavaScript to ensure a user can't enter a negative number in a banking transfer field.
Which makes sense. You shouldn't be able to transfer negative $50.
Right. And if a user tries it in a normal browser, the JavaScript blocks it immediately. But a tester using ZAP intercepts the traffic after it leaves the browser.
Oh, because the browser already approved it.
Exactly. The browser says it's fine, sends the packet, and the tester pauses the request in ZAP. They manually change the transfer value to a negative number in the intercepted packet, and then forward the modified packet to the server.
And if the server lacks robust server-side validation?
It processes the negative transfer. It actually subtracts money from the recipient and gives it to the attacker.
Wow. That is wild. And once that proxy is established, the AT basically automates the discovery of the application's attack surface through spidering or crawling.
Right, finding all the hidden pages.
Yeah, because a traditional spider parses the static HTML, looking for anchor tags to find new links. But modern web apps are heavily dynamic, right? They're built on React or Angular, where links are generated dynamically by JavaScript.
So a basic HTML scraper won't see them.
Exactly. But ZAP utilizes AJAX spidering. It launches headless browsers to actually execute the JavaScript and trigger the dynamically generated DOM elements. It uncovers API endpoints and hidden administrative panels that a simple HTML scraper would entirely miss, and it lists them all nicely under the URLs tab.
And following the mapping phase, ZAP transitions to active scanning. It takes the comprehensive list of endpoints, input fields, and headers discovered during spidering and systematically bombards them with known attack payloads.
Just throws the kitchen sink at them.
Pretty much. The ZAP attack feature injects SQL commands into search bars, cross-site scripting payloads into comment fields, path traversal strings into URL parameters, and ZAP monitors the HTTP responses.
Okay, so how does it know if it worked?
Well, if an injected SQL string causes the server to return a database syntax error, ZAP flags it. It categorizes alerts by risk level: high, medium, low, informational.
But let me push back on this for a second. If ZAP is a free tool that literally automates the discovery of vulnerabilities, doesn't that mean literally anyone with an internet connection can scan a target?
Yes, absolutely anyone.
So how do early career professionals defend against something so incredibly accessible?
The democratization of automated vulnerability discovery tools like ZAP is definitely a double-edged sword. OWASP provides this enterprise-grade scanning engine entirely for free. The barrier to entry is non-existent. A script kiddie with zero understanding of relational databases can point ZAP at an IP address, click attack, and discover a critical SQL injection flaw.
Because it just does the work for them.
Right, it automates the discovery of the vulnerability. So the defense against this reality is proactive integration. Security operations teams must integrate ZAP or, similar dynamic application security testing tools directly into their CI/CD pipelines.
Scan it before it goes live.
You have to. You must automate the scanning of your own code commits, identifying and patching the vulnerabilities before they ever reach the production environment. You just have to assume the adversary is running these exact same scans continuously on the outside.
Right. And to accurately interpret the alerts generated by ZAP, or honestly to manually hunt for logic flaws that the automated scanners miss, a practitioner must possess a granular understanding of the underlying transport mechanism.
Yeah, you have to know how the web actually works under the hood.
Which necessitates a deep dive into HTTP basics and error codes. Because Hypertext Transfer Protocol is the lingua franca of the web. It operates natively on TCP port 80, or port 443 when wrapped in TLS encryption for HTTPS.
And ethical hackers can pull vital system information just by looking at HTTP commands and return codes.
Exactly. HTTP relies on a strict request-response architecture using specific methods or verbs. The GET method is obviously the most ubiquitous. It requests a representation of the specified resource. And parameters in a GET request are appended directly to the URL, making them highly visible and easily manipulated.
Right, like when you see a search query right there in the address bar.
Yep. Now, the POST method submits an entity to the specified resource, often causing a change in state or side effects on the server. Because POST data is included in the body of the HTTP request rather than the URL, it is typically used for transmitting sensitive data, like authentication credentials or large file uploads.
But advanced reconnaissance really leverages the less common HTTP methods.
Like which ones?
We'll take the head method. It is identical to GET, but it explicitly instructs the server not to return the message body. The server only returns the HTTP headers.
Why is that useful to an attacker?
Because if you're an attacker scanning millions of IP addresses just to fingerprint server software, the head method is incredibly efficient. It consumes vastly less bandwidth and forces the server to reveal its, say, Server Apache 2.4.41 Ubuntu banner without the overhead of transmitting the actual HTML payload.
Oh, that's clever. It's like asking for a business card instead of the whole brochure.
Exactly. Then there's the options method. This is a direct query of the server's configuration. An attacker sends an options request to a specific URL, basically asking the server, hey, what HTTP methods do you actually allow for this resource?
And the server answers.
Yep. If the server responds with an allow header that says get, post, put, delete, the attacker immediately pivots, because the PT method is designed to create or replace a resource at the target URL.
Uh-oh.
Right. If a web server is misconfigured to accept arbitrary PUT requests from unauthenticated users, an attacker can upload a malicious PHP web shell directly to the document root, achieving remote code execution.
That is game over.
Completely game over. We also see the trace method, which is another historical configuration flaw. It was originally designed for diagnostic purposes. When a server receives a trace request, it echoes the exact request back to the client.
It's like a remote loopback.
Exactly. Now, if an attacker can fool a victim's browser to send a trace request via cross-site scripting, the server will echo back the victim's HTTP headers, including their highly sensitive HTTP-only session cookies.
So it bypasses client-side security mechanisms.
Yep. This is known as cross-site tracing. Oh, and I should mention Connect, which is primarily used for proxy tunneling like SSL or TLS. But delete is self-explanatory. It removes a resource.
Right. And while the methods are the requests, the HTTP status codes returned by the server are equally vital intelligence. They're basically the server's telemetry. So let's decode the client errors. The 400 class error codes, they indicate a client-side error.
We all know 404 not found.
We've all seen a 404, but let's look at the nuances of the others. A 400 bad request just means the syntax was malformed. But a 401 unauthorized code means the client must authenticate itself to get the requested response. The server is essentially saying, I know what you want, but you need a valid token to get it.
Right, and you really have to contrast that with 403 forbidden. A 403 means the server understands the request, but actively refuses to authorize it. Unlike a 401, providing authentication makes no difference here.
It's just a flat-out no.
Exactly. The client's identity is known, but they lack the necessary permissions. In security testing, encountering a 403 on a directory like /admin panel / confirms that the directory exists.
Which is huge.
Yeah. Attackers will then attempt to bypass the 403 restriction using header manipulation. They'll inject headers like exported for 127.0.0.1 to trick the server into believing the request is originating from the local loopback address, potentially bypassing the access control list.
That's sneaky. And to round out the 400s, you have 405 method not allowed, which goes back to our options discussion. 408 request timeout. 410 gone, which is like a permanent 404. 413 request entity too large, and 414 request URI too long. But really, the 500 class error codes are where the real exploitation paths open up.
Oh, absolutely.
These indicate server errors. The server failed to fulfill an apparently valid request. A 500 internal server error occurs when the server encounters an unexpected condition. Now, in a production environment, this should just return a generic something went wrong graphic, right?
It should, but developers frequently leave verbose debugging mode enabled. And what happens then?
Well, when verbose errors are enabled, a 500 internal server error won't just say it failed. It will output the entire stack trace of the application right to the user's browser.
The actual code structure.
Yeah. The stack trace is a detailed report of the active stack frames at the exact moment the code crashed. It reveals the underlying application framework, like whether it's Spring Boot, Django, or Ruby on Rails.
Which tells the attacker exactly what exploits to look up.
Exactly. It reveals the exact file paths on the server's hard drive, like c:/inetpub/wwwroot/app/database.php. It might even leak snippets of the source code or database connection strings.
Unbelievable.
So an attacker will intentionally send malformed SQL syntax or excessively long URL parameters specifically to trigger these 500 errors and harvest the resulting stack traces. They use the stack trace to map the server's internal file system architecture. It's like breaking a window just to see what kind of glass they use.
Yeah.
And then you have 501 not implemented, 505 HTTP version not supported. But 502 bad gateway and 504 gateway timeout are also critical indicators of infrastructure topology.
How so?
Well, they occur when a server is acting as a proxy or load balancer and is attempting to communicate with an upstream backend server. If you send a heavy payload and receive a 504 gateway timeout, you know there is a secondary backend architecture processing your requests.
Ah.
And that informs how you structure your timing attacks or denial of service payloads. So an unexpected 405 or 500 error isn't just a broken web page. To an ethical hacker, the HTTP error code is a diagnostic readout of the target's defensive posture. It reveals the underlying operating system and potential software vulnerabilities.
Now, transitioning from mapping the server architecture to tracking the human users accessing that architecture, we really have to analyze the mechanisms of state management and surveillance.
Which means we're talking about cookies.
Yes, because HTTP is inherently a stateless protocol. Every single request is completely independent. To build a functional web application, developers have to implement a mechanism to track a user across multiple requests.
Yep.
And this is achieved through cookies.
Right. And a cookie is just a small text file generated by a web server and stored locally in the user's web browser. When the user successfully authenticates, the server generates a unique session identifier and sends it to the browser via the setCookie HTTP header.
Yeah.
On every subsequent request, the browser automatically includes that session ID in the cookie header. The server reads the ID, validates it against its database, and recognizes the user.
But the security implications of this session management are severe.
Because if someone steals the cookie.
Exactly. If that session cookie is intercepted or stolen, the attacker executes a session hijacking attack. They literally just inject the stolen cookie into their own browser. When they navigate to the target application, the server reads the valid session ID and grants the attacker full access to the victim's account.
No password needed.
No username, no password, no multi-factor authentication token is required. The session is simply assumed.
This is exactly why security engineers must enforce strict cookie attributes. The secure flag ensures the cookie is only ever transmitted over an encrypted HTTPS connection, preventing interception on, open airport Wi-Fi networks.
Excellent.
And the HTTP-only flag is even more critical. It explicitly instructs the browser that the cookie cannot be accessed via client-side scripts. If an application is vulnerable to cross-site scripting and an attacker injects malicious JavaScript into the victim's browser, the HTTP-only flag prevents that JavaScript from reading the session cookie and exfiltrating it.
Right. And while cookies are used for necessary session management, they are heavily weaponized for surveillance when combined with web bugs, which are also known as tracking pixels or web beacons.
Oh, I hate these things.
They are everywhere. A web bug relies on the browser's native behavior of fetching external resources. A developer embeds an invisible 1 pixel by 1 pixel image into a web page. Often they'll match it to the background color or just set its opacity to 0.
So it's completely invisible to the user.
Completely invisible. And the source attribute of the image tag points to a third-party tracking server.
And the mechanism of tracking here relies entirely on that HTTP GET request we talked about earlier. When your browser renders the web page, it encounters the image tag and dutifully sends a GET request to the third-party server to download the invisible pixel.
And it sends a lot of info with it.
So much. Within that GET request, your browser automatically includes several pieces of highly revealing telemetry. It includes the referer header, which tells the tracking server the exact URL of the web page you are currently viewing. It includes your user agent string, detailing your operating system and browser version.
Most importantly, if the tracking server has previously set a cookie in your browser during a past encounter on a completely different website, your browser sends that cookie back along with the request for the pixel.
So they connect the dots.
It's exactly. This allows third-party data collection companies, acting basically as spyware or adware, to correlate your browsing habits across vast swaths of the internet. They build a comprehensive psychological and behavioral profile without you ever interacting directly with their primary domain.
And to connect this to you, the listener, think about your daily web browsing. Think about how much data is silently harvested just by loading a web page. You read a news article and 50 invisible pixels fire off GET requests to 50 different advertising networks, log in your IP, your OS, and the exact article you're reading. It's an aha moment when you realize you're being footprinted constantly.
It's true. And for incident responders, analyzing the flow of these third-party requests is essential when investigating data exfiltration or determining if a user's browser has been compromised by adware that is silently redirecting traffic.
Now, let's scale up from tracking individual browsers to mapping entire corporate networks. The framework designates the domain name system, or DNS, as a primary vulnerability vector. DNS is the foundational routing infrastructure of the internet. We interact with human-readable host names, but TCP/IP networks route traffic using numerical IP addresses.
Right. DNS is the phone book. It resolves those host names to IPs, and it is one of the most vulnerable network components out there.
A standard DNS lookup utilizes UDP port 53. The client asks for the IP address of mail.target.com, and the server quickly replies with a single record. But there's also reverse DNS lookup, right, where this queries an IP to find a domain name.
Yeah, reverse lookups are often used to filter spam or generate B2B leads, not typically for attacking directly. But
Yeah.
enterprise DNS architecture requires redundancy.
Right.
A primary authoritative name server must synchronize its massive database of records, the zone file, with secondary backup servers. This synchronization utilizes a mechanism called a DNS zone transfer, or an AXFR request.
And this is where the transport protocol shifts. Because a zone transfer requires transmitting a large amount of data reliably, the DNS server switches from UDP to TCP port 53. If a network administrator configures their firewall to allow TCP port 53 traffic from anywhere and configures the DNS server itself to allow AXFR requests from any IP address rather than restricting them strictly to the IP addresses of the authorized secondary servers,
They expose the entire internal architecture.
it's devastating.
I really want to frame this vulnerability clearly. Think of a restaurant. A standard DNS query is like asking the host for a copy of the dinner menu. It tells you what is publicly available right now.
Okay.
A DNS zone transfer is like walking up to the host and demanding the restaurant's master supply manifest. You aren't just seeing the menu, you are seeing the physical address of the off-site slaughterhouse, the alarm codes for the walk-in freezers, the personal cell phone number of the head chef, and the delivery schedule of the armored car picking up the cash.
It hands the attacker the organization's entire network diagram, every single host on the network. But what tool do they actually use to do this?
The tool of choice for executing this query is DIG, the Domain Information Groper. It completely replaced nslookup for this kind of work. It is a highly versatile command line utility for querying DNS name servers.
So how does an attacker use DIG?
Well, they use DIG to locate the target's SOA, the start of authority record. The SOA record explicitly identifies the primary authoritative name server responsible for the IP zones. Once identified, the attacker directs an AXFR request specifically at that primary server.
And if the misconfiguration exists?
The server just responds by dumping every single A record, MX record for mail servers, CNAME aliases, and TXT records. The attacker receives a perfectly formatted map of the internal network that is covering hidden development servers, VPN gateways, and legacy infrastructure without ever running a noisy port scan against the perimeter.
But wait, I have to ask. If a zone transfer literally gives away the entire map of the castle, why would any network administrator ever leave that feature enabled? Is it just misconfiguration?
Almost always, it is a legacy vulnerability.
Yeah.
Decades ago, the internet was built on a model of implicit trust. Zone transfers were often allowed by default because there were far fewer bad actors.
Right.
Modern DNS software definitely defaults to restrictive configurations. However, complex enterprise migrations, temporary firewall rule relaxations during late-night troubleshooting, or inexperienced administrators deploying new bind servers frequently reintroduce this catastrophic misconfiguration. Validating DNS zone transfer restrictions is a mandatory first step in any external penetration test.
It's just a simple checkbox that ruins everything.
Yeah.
But all the digital footprinting we've discussed, scraping metadata, analyzing HTTP error codes, downloading DNS zone files, that just provides the technical blueprint.
Yeah, that's just a start.
Right, because the most sophisticated threat actors leverage this technical blueprint to execute attacks against the most porous perimeter in any organization, the human firewall. This is where the curriculum transitions heavily into social engineering.
And social engineering completely bypasses the cryptographic strength of the network. It targets human resources and is basically the biggest, most difficult threat to protect against. It exploits the psychological heuristics and cognitive biases inherent in human decision-making.
The ultimate vulnerability.
Exactly. The framework identifies the core psychological levers attackers manipulate. We see persuasion, which involves building rapport and trust over time. We see intimidation, where an attacker adopts the persona of a senior authority figure to force compliance through fear of professional repercussion.
Do this now or you're fired.
Yep, they use coercion, extortion, and blackmailing.
We also see the exploitation of behavioral norms, like specific techniques used in the field. The principle of quid pro quo is highly effective.
Oh, that one works so well.
An attacker calls a user desk and claims to be from IT support. They don't ask for a password immediately. They tell the user they are calling to fix the slow network performance everyone has been complaining about.
They offer a benefit.
Exactly. Once the user agrees to the fix, the attacker asks for the user's credentials to execute the script. The user complies because they feel they are receiving a service in exchange.
This relies heavily on pulling specific psychological levers. The attacker leverages scarcity or urgency to bypass critical thinking. If an email claims an account will be permanently deleted in 5 minutes unless a link is clicked, the amygdala takes over.
The panic response.
Yeah, the user reacts emotionally rather than analytically. They click the link to a credential harvesting portal before they process the suspicious domain name in the URL bar. They also use the status quo, kindness and position, basically exploiting authority. Attackers study shyness, insecurity, body language, and even tone of voice to manipulate their targets.
So what's the defense strategy? Because defending against social engineering requires a fundamental shift in organizational culture. Technical controls, like email filtering and multi-factor authentication, are necessary but honestly insufficient.
Education is the only real defense. The defense relies on rigorous, continuous security awareness training. Employees must be trained to never reveal OS details, to always ask questions.
Right.
And the curriculum emphasizes a critical rule: verification through out-of-band communication. Employees must get a phone number to call the person back to verify their identity.
Like, if an employee receives a frantic phone call from someone claiming to be the CFO demanding an immediate wire transfer, the employee must be trained to hang up the phone. They must then look up the CFO's internal extension in the corporate directory and initiate a new call themselves to verify the request.
It completely breaks the attack chain. It neutralizes caller ID spoofing and forces the attacker to control both the inbound and outbound communication channels, which is exponentially more difficult.
But we also have to address the physical manifestations of social engineering. The framework details physical exploits that require proximity to the target, and shoulder surfing is the most direct. An attacker literally spies on someone typing passwords or PINs.
But this isn't just watching a screen.
No. Advanced threat actors understand the ergonomics of keyboard layouts. Their tactics involve memorizing key positions. Like, if a corporate policy mandates complex passwords requiring special characters, the attacker doesn't need to see the screen at all. They watch the target's hands.
Right.
If the target's left pinky hits the shift key while their index finger reaches for the number 4, the attacker logs a $sign. By knowing common letter substitutions, like swapping an S for a $sign or an A for an @ symbol, they reconstruct the password simply by watching the keystroke cadence. Sometimes they even use binoculars or high-powered telescopes from across the street.
Which means prevention requires physical controls. Workstations in public areas or high-traffic corridors must be oriented so monitors face away from the flow of traffic.
Avoid typing when someone is on a cell phone nearby, right?
Exactly. And the deployment of polarized privacy lenses on laptop screens is mandatory for employees who travel or work remotely, restricting the viewing angle to directly in front of the device.
Another physical vector is dumpster diving, finding treasure in the trash. The objective is to acquire the physical artifacts of the organization's operational footprint.
And an attacker isn't just looking for discarded hardware.
Right. Their targets are financial reports, inter-office memos, organizational charts. An organizational chart provides the exact reporting structure of the company. It tells the attacker who has authorization over who. They look for resumes, utility bills, charge card receipts, even discarded vendor invoices. An invoice from Cisco tells the attacker exactly what networking hardware is in the server room, allowing them to research specific CVEs for that equipment.
So prevention means shredding, off-site manual disposal, and crucially, managing discarded digital media. This is a highly complex physical security requirement. When a user deletes a file on a traditional magnetic hard disk drive, the operating system does not erase the actual data.
It just hides it.
Exactly.
Okay.
It simply deletes the file allocation table pointer, marking the sectors as available for new data. The magnetic flux representing the ones and zeros remains entirely intact on the platters. A basic data recovery tool can restore the entire file system.
So you have to format the drive.
Even formatting the drive is insufficient. You have to actively overwrite the data. But the curriculum explicitly mentions formatting discarded disks with software that writes binary zeros at least 7 times to eliminate residual magnetism.
Okay, let's explain the physical mechanism behind the standard, because I find this fascinating. Why 7 times?
It involves the physics of magnetic media and that concept I just mentioned, residual magnetism. When a read-write head alters the magnetic orientation of a microscopic domain on a disk platter from a 1 to a 0, it applies a magnetic field. However, this reversal is never physically perfect.
It leaves a trace.
Yes. If the bit was previously a 1, the new 0 might have a faint residual magnetic signature. It might read as a .05, instead of a true absolute 0.00.
So the ghosts of the old data are still there.
Precisely. If an adversary gains possession of that discarded hard drive and utilizes laboratory-grade equipment, specifically a magnetic force microscope, they can analyze the edges of the magnetic tracks. By measuring these minute variations in magnetic field strength, forensic analysts can mathematically reconstruct the previous layers of data that were written to that sector.
That is insane.
It is. The theory behind the legacy Department of Defense wiping standard, which required overwriting the disk with zeros, then ones, then random characters over multiple passes, was to completely scramble and neutralize that residual magnetic signature, ensuring the data was unrecoverable even at a microscopic level.
It is a perfect example of why physical security protocols must be rigorous. If you throw a drive in the trash without destroying the platters or cryptographically wiping the keys, you literally hand the adversary your entire database.
You really do.
Now, the final physical vector we need to examine is piggybacking, or tailgating. This is gaining physical access to restricted areas by bypassing access control systems.
Piggybacking weaponizes social norms. Access to a secure facility is governed by RFID badges and turnstiles. An attacker clones an employee's badge using a concealed long-range RFID reader in a crowded elevator, or they bypass the credential entirely.
Just by trailing an authorized person.
Yep. They wait near a secure door carrying a large, heavy box. They might be fumbling with fake badges or pretending to have full hands. An authorized employee swipes their badge and opens the door. Seeing the attacker struggling with the box, the employee's natural, socially conditioned response is to be polite and hold the door open for them.
I always compare piggybacking to someone carrying a heavy box of popcorn to sneak into a movie theater behind a large family. You're just weaponizing human politeness against security protocols. The attacker smiles, says thank you, and bypasses millions of dollars of physical access controls.
Which is why prevention requires a structural change in the corporate environment. Turnstiles and man-trap configurations mechanically prevent multiple entries on a single badge swipe.
But what if you can't install those?
Where mechanical controls are impossible, the organization must enforce absolute, universal access card rules. Every employee must swipe their own badge for every single entry. Staff must be explicitly trained to never hold secured doors open, even for people they know. They have to challenge anyone who attempts to follow them through a door, regardless of how awkward or rude it feels to shut a door in someone's face.
And when we synthesize every concept covered in this analysis, right? The passive OSINT gathering, the infrastructural mapping via DNS and HTTP analysis, the physical footprinting, and the psychological levers of social engineering. When we put it all together, we arrive at digital deception, specifically phishing versus spear-phishing.
Yeah, this really ties the entire chapter together.
Because phishing is broad spectrum. Low-effort attacks, urgent emails like, your account has been limited, pointing to fake websites to steal account data. An attacker blasts 10,000 generic emails claiming a Netflix account requires a password reset. They rely entirely on the law of large numbers.
But spear-phishing is a highly targeted, meticulously crafted campaign directed at a specific individual or department. And this is how it all connects. An advanced persistent threat group doesn't just guess an email address. They execute the full footprinting lifecycle from segment 2.
They use all the tools.
All of them. They use FOCA to pull the metadata from a company's white papers, discovering the username format and the exact version of Microsoft Word the internal network uses. They use Maltego to gather OSINT and map the target's social media presence, discovering they recently attended a specific regional cybersecurity conference. They use DIG to map the MX records of the corporate mail server.
And with that comprehensive intelligence, the attacker crafts an email specifically addressed to the target, spoofing the domain of the conference organizers. The email mentions mutual interests, referencing specific panels the target attended.
It's so personalized.
Exactly. And it includes a malicious Word document attachment labeled like post-conference networking roster. Because the attacker used FOCIA to identify the target's exact version of Word, the macro embedded in the document is perfectly calibrated to exploit a known vulnerability in that specific build to trick the employee into installing malware.
The psychological hook is flawless. The technical execution is perfectly tailored. When the target opens the document, the payload executes, establishing a reverse shell back to the attacker's command and control infrastructure.
And the perimeter firewall is bypassed entirely.
Entirely, because the internal user willingly executed the payload. The entire compromise is predicated on the intelligence gathered during the footprinting phase.
It brings our entire analysis full circle. The core narrative here is that cybersecurity isn't just about firewalls. It starts with the massive digital footprint organizations leave floating around and ends with the psychological manipulation of the people inside the building, which ties directly back to our opening hook about simply asking for the password.
This curriculum effectively prepares practitioners because it does not isolate these concepts. It forces the student to view the network through the eyes of an adversary who leverages public information to orchestrate devastating, targeted compromises. You must understand the mechanics of the reconnaissance to build an architecture capable of withstanding it.
Well said. We want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who joined us for this deep dive. As a reminder, if this technical breakdown provided value to your operational readiness, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this analysis with your colleagues.
Yes, please do.
And don't forget to check the description below for links to the frameworks and OSINT tools we discussed, along with additional resources to fuel your career growth in the tech sector.
We also strongly encourage you to review the channel for our other educational podcasts, playlists, and video lectures. Continuous learning is the only defense against an evolving threat landscape.
Absolutely.
If you are intrigued by the forensic analysis of residual magnetism or the tracking of web bugs, delve into our Digital Forensics podcast series hosted on the channel. Or, for a more structural view of defense in depth, check out the Network and System Security podcast series.
And I'm excited to announce that next week, we advance the operational timeline. We will be covering Chapter 5, Port Scanning.
Ooh, that's a good one.
We're moving out of the reconnaissance phase and initiating direct, active engagement with the target's perimeter defenses. We will break down TCP flags, SYN floods, and the mechanics of evading intrusion detection systems.
It is a highly technical, foundational skill set for both offensive testing and defensive monitoring.
But before we sign off today, we want to leave you with a final, reflective, provocative thought tied directly to today's chapter. Think about your own organization right now. Run the footprinting lifecycle in your head. How much of your digital blueprint is freely floating in a DNS record, and how much of your physical blueprint is currently sitting in the trash?
It's a scary thought. Master the attack. Fortify the defense. Until next time, keep your hands on the keys and your network secure.